Welcome to English with Zenko Master. Get ready to learn something new today.
My name is Andrea. I am 35 years old, and for the past 10 years, I lived a life that looked normal from the outside. People who saw us thought we were a quiet, happy family. But there was something they didn't see. Inside our house, things were different. And it took one moment, one terrible moment, to wake me up from my silence. It happened on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen washing dishes while my son Jamie sat on the floor in the hallway trying to tie his shoes. The television was on in the living room, and Paul, my husband, was sitting on the couch. Everything seemed calm. Then I heard his voice. It was loud and sharp. "Can't you do anything right?" he shouted. My hands froze in the water. I didn't move at first. Then I ran to see what was going on. Jamie was still sitting on the floor. His small fingers were wrapped around his shoelace, and his eyes were full of fear. Paul stood above him, red in the face, his arms tight at his sides. He didn't touch Jamie, but he didn't need to. His words were enough. His anger filled the whole room. Jamie didn't say anything. He just looked up at his father, confused and scared. I stood there for a few seconds, unable to speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Paul turned to me and said, "Maybe you can teach him how to tie his shoes before he starts high school." Then he grabbed his keys and left the house. The door slammed behind him, and silence filled the room. Jamie looked at me. His face was pale, and his lower lip was shaking, but he didn't cry. I walked over and knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. He gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, while Jamie was asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen. I kept thinking about what had happened. This wasn't the first time Paul shouted at Jamie. It had happened before, many times, but this time felt different. It felt heavier, more dangerous. Something inside me had changed. When Paul and I met, he was charming and smart. He worked in technology, and he was respected at work. He made people laugh. He made me feel special at first. But after we got married, the kindness began to fade. At home, he was cold and critical. He didn't hit me, but his words cut deep. His silence was like a wall between us. And with every year that passed, the wall got higher. I used to tell myself he was just tired or stressed. I made excuses for him. I thought things would get better, but they didn't. They only got worse. And I got quieter. I stopped talking about my feelings. I stopped sharing things with friends and family. I became smaller. I disappeared into the background of my own life. But Jamie saw everything. And that was what hurt the most. He started to walk more softly in the house. He stopped asking questions. He tried not to make mistakes. He was only 9 years old, but he already knew how to live in fear. The next week, Jamie came home from school without his homework folder. "Can we just say we did it?" he asked. So he won't be mad? I felt like I couldn't breathe. My son wanted to lie because he was afraid of telling the truth. What kind of home had I built for him? That evening, I watched Paul come home. He took off his shoes, sat on the couch, and asked what was for dinner. I told him I hadn't started cooking yet because I was helping Jamie with his schoolwork. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, then turned on the television. Later that night, I sent Jamie to bed and called my sister Clara. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but I needed someone to listen. The next morning, I took the train to her town. Her house was small and warm, filled with plants and sunlight. When I walked in, I felt like I could breathe again. Clara made us tea and asked what was wrong. I told her everything. I didn't leave anything out. I told her how Paul shouted, how Jamie had started to feel scared in his own home, and how I had let it go on for too long. I expected her to be shocked, but she wasn't. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "You always looked tired when we talked. I didn't want to push you." I started to cry. The tears came fast and wouldn't stop. Clara didn't say much. She just held my hand and let me cry. "You can't keep living like this," she said. "And Jamie shouldn't have to grow up like that either." I went home that evening with a heavy heart. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. That night, Jamie came into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Mom," he said, "can I sleep here tonight?" "Of course," I said. I moved over and held the blanket open for him. He climbed in beside me and lay still for a while. Then he whispered, "I don't like it when Dad gets angry." "I know," I said. "I don't like it either." The next morning, I got up early and made Jamie's favorite breakfast, pancakes with strawberries. We sat at the table together, and for a few minutes it felt like peace. Paul came downstairs later, looking tired. He poured himself coffee and didn't say a word. Later that day, Jamie and I went to the park. We sat on a bench and watched the ducks in the water. He asked if we could go visit Clara again soon. "I like her house," he said. "It feels safe." I smiled and touched his shoulder. "We'll go again soon." That night, Paul was in a bad mood. He couldn't find his phone charger, and he blamed me for moving it. I told him I hadn't touched it. He rolled his eyes and walked away. Then Jamie dropped his glass of milk at dinner. It spilled across the table, and Paul stood up fast. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted. "Are you stupid?" My heart jumped. Jamie backed away from the table. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I made my voice strong. "Stop it, Paul," I said. "Don't talk to him like that. He's a child. He made a mistake. That doesn't make him stupid." Paul stared at me. "Don't tell me how to talk in my own house." "I'm not telling," I said. I'm asking you to be kind, to be better. We all deserve better." The room was quiet. Jamie looked at me with wide eyes. Paul didn't say anything. He left the room, went upstairs, and closed the door. Jamie turned to me. "You stood up," he said. "You said something." "Yes," I whispered. "I finally did." That night, after Paul went to bed without another word, I stayed downstairs in the quiet kitchen. The lights were off except for one small lamp above the sink. I sat at the table with a cup of tea, holding it between my hands, trying to stop them from shaking. I kept thinking about what had just happened. I had spoken. After all these years, I had finally spoken. It didn't feel like winning. I wasn't proud or brave in that moment. I was scared. But I knew one thing with complete clarity. Something had changed between us. And I didn't want to go back to the way things were. Jamie came down a few minutes later. He was in his pajamas, his eyes still half closed. "I heard you," he said softly. "You should be in bed, sweetheart," I said, trying to smile. But he walked over and hugged me. "You were brave," he whispered into my neck. I held him tightly. I didn't want to let go. The next morning, Paul acted as if nothing had happened. He came downstairs, made coffee, read the news on his phone. He didn't look at me or speak to Jamie. At breakfast, Jamie was quiet too, eating slowly, his eyes moving between us. Before he left for school, Jamie hugged me again. He didn't usually do that, but this time, he held on longer. When Paul left for work, I stood by the window and watched him walk to the car. As he drove away, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The house felt lighter without him inside it. I spent the morning cleaning, not because it needed it, but because I needed to move. I needed to do something with my hands. My thoughts were loud. Was Paul going to change? Was he going to get worse? Would he leave us? Would he try to make things better? I didn't know. But I had said what I needed to say, and I wasn't going to pretend anymore. Later that week, I went to the school to talk to Jamie's teacher. I hadn't planned to, but I kept thinking about how he was doing, not just with schoolwork, but emotionally. Mrs. Howard was kind and calm. She asked me to sit down, and we talked privately in her classroom. "Jamie is a bright boy," she said. "But he's very quiet these days. He doesn't raise his hand anymore. And he often looks tired." I looked down at my hands and nodded. "There are some problems at home," I said. "His father isn't always kind." She didn't ask questions. She just listened. "Is he safe?" she asked finally. "Yes," I said. "But I think he's afraid." Mrs. Howard nodded. "You're doing the right thing by talking about it." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. You're doing the right thing. I had forgotten what that felt like. When Jamie got home that evening, he looked tired again. He dropped his backpack by the door and kicked off his shoes. "Do you want to go for a walk with me?" I asked. He nodded. We walked through the quiet neighborhood, past houses with flower gardens and children playing outside. Jamie didn't talk much at first, but after a few minutes he said, "I like it when it's just us." "I do too," I said. We walked all the way to the park, sat on a bench, and watched the sun go down. Jamie leaned against me. "Do you think Dad will be mad again?" he asked. I took a deep breath. He might, but I won't let him hurt you with his words anymore. Jamie looked up at me. "What if he gets mad at you?" "I'm not scared of that anymore," I said. "Or maybe I still am, but I'm not letting the fear stop me." He didn't say anything, but he rested his head on my arm and stayed close. The next day, Paul was quiet again. He didn't talk to either of us much, but I could feel something building inside him. He wasn't used to me standing up to him. I think he was waiting for me to go back to silence. But I didn't. When Jamie forgot to put his dish in the sink after dinner, Paul looked ready to shout again. But I stepped in first. "I'll help him clean up," I said before Paul could speak. Paul narrowed his eyes. "You're turning him into a baby." "No," I said. "I'm showing him how to be kind. And I'm teaching him that making a mistake is okay." Paul stared at me for a long second. Then he left the room. Again. The weeks that followed were full of small battles. Paul didn't shout as much, but he was colder. He avoided us. He stayed late at work. He started sleeping in the guest room. Jamie noticed everything. One night, Jamie asked, "Why doesn't Dad love us?" I sat on his bed and ran my fingers through his hair. "He does love us," I said. "But he doesn't know how to show it in a kind way. That's not your fault. And it's not mine either. Do you still love him?" That question was harder. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I used to. But now, I think I need to love myself and you more." He was quiet for a while. Then he whispered, "I love you." A few days later, Paul came home early. He walked into the kitchen and looked around. "We need to talk," he said. Jamie was upstairs, so I nodded and sat down at the table. Paul sat across from me. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I answered. "I had to." He looked uncomfortable. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore." "Maybe you never really did," I said. "Or maybe I never spoke up before." He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you planning to leave?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I know I can't live like this anymore." Paul stood up and walked to the window. "You're making me the bad guy." "You did that yourself," I said calmly. All I did was finally speak. That night, I started looking at rental apartments online. I didn't know if I would leave next week, next month, or next year. But I wanted to be ready. I wanted to know that I had choices. And most of all, I wanted Jamie to see that we weren't stuck. I also made an appointment with a family counselor. Just for Jamie and me. For now. I didn't tell Paul. I didn't think he'd understand. But I didn't need his permission anymore. When I told Jamie about the counselor, he looked nervous. Will I have to talk a lot? No, I said. You can say as much or as little as you want. It's just someone who will listen and help. Will you be there too? Only if you want me to be. He nodded slowly. Okay. A few days later, we went to our first session. Jamie was quiet at first, but then he opened up more than I expected. He talked about school, about feeling small at home, about the way Dad's voice made him feel. The counselor looked at me and said, "He's carrying a lot." I nodded. So am I. But now we weren't carrying it alone. The days grew longer, and the air felt different. It wasn't just the change in seasons. Something had shifted inside me. I still lived in the same house. I still made breakfast and folded laundry. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I had begun to rebuild something I thought I lost long ago. My strength. Jamie was doing better. Slowly, but clearly. He still had bad days. Sometimes he would wake in the night and ask if everything was okay. Other times, he would hug me tightly before school and ask if I was still strong today. I always said yes, and I meant it, even when I was tired or unsure. I didn't want him to see me afraid. Not anymore. Paul continued to keep his distance. He stayed quiet and cold. He didn't yell again, but he didn't try to fix anything either. We lived in the same house, but it felt like we were in different worlds. Jamie noticed. One evening, he said, "It's like he's not even here, even when he's sitting at the table." I didn't know what to say, so I said the truth. Maybe he doesn't know how to be close. Maybe no one ever showed him. But you try, Jamie said. You try every day. That stayed with me. I wasn't perfect. I didn't have all the answers. But I showed up. I tried. And maybe that was enough to begin healing. After a few weeks, the counselor suggested something. She thought I should come alone for a session. Just me. I didn't want to at first. I said I was fine. But inside, I knew I wasn't. I still carried years of silence. I still carried the guilt of staying quiet for so long. So I went. I sat in the small room, on the soft chair, and looked at the woman across from me. She had kind eyes. She didn't rush me. She waited. And then I began to talk. I talked about the first year of our marriage, about how Paul slowly changed, how I blamed myself when he became cold. I spoke about the time he broke a plate near me, not at me, but close enough to make me flinch. I told her how I stopped seeing friends, stopped calling family, stopped dancing in the kitchen, stopped laughing loudly. I had become small, so small, trying not to make waves. I forgot who I was, I said. But you remembered, she replied. That's why you're here. Her words felt like light through a dirty window. After that session, I began to make more small changes. I called Clara more often. I started taking walks in the evening alone, just for myself. I borrowed books from the library and actually finished them. I played music in the house again, not loudly, but with joy. Jamie even started dancing again sometimes, without fear. One Saturday morning, I took him to the library. He picked out a book about space and said, "I want to be an astronaut." I smiled and said, "You can be anything, Jamie. Anything at all." He looked at me seriously and said, "I believe you now." That made me cry in the car on the way home, not because I was sad, but because I knew he had felt the difference. And he trusted me again. One afternoon, Paul came home early. I was making dinner, and Jamie was working on homework at the table. Paul walked in, looked around, and said, "So this is what things look like now?" I didn't answer. "You don't even ask me how I am anymore." "I used to," I said. "For years. You never wanted to talk." "I didn't know you'd stop caring." "I didn't stop caring," I said. "I stopped begging." He sat down. Jamie looked up from his work, confused by the sudden tension in the room. Paul rubbed his hands together and finally asked, "Do you want me to leave?" Jamie's eyes went wide. I reached out and touched his shoulder. "Go to your room, sweetheart. It's okay." He didn't move at first, but then he slowly picked up his book and left. I turned back to Paul. My voice was calm. "I don't know what I want right now, but I know I can't keep pretending we're fine. You scare him, Paul. You scare me too." "I never hit anyone," he said quietly. "No," I said. "But that's not the only kind of harm." He looked away. "I need space," I said. "Real space. Not silence in the same house." He nodded, but I could see it was hard for him to accept. The next week, Paul packed a small bag and moved into a short-term rental apartment nearby. We didn't fight. We didn't cry. We just stood by the door and nodded at each other. Jamie hugged him goodbye, but it was short and quiet. The house felt strange that first night. Empty, but also safe. Jamie asked, "Is he coming back?" "I don't know," I said. "But for now, it's going to be us." "Just us?" "Just us," I said, and I smiled. In the months that followed, I changed in small but important ways. I applied for a part-time job at the community center and got it. I joined a book group. I met women who had stories like mine. Some had left. Some had stayed. But all of them had found their voices. I was not alone anymore. Jamie flourished. He smiled more. He talked more. He invited a friend over for the first time in a long time. He even stood up for another boy at school who was being picked on. Later that day, he said, "I did what you did. I said something." And I told him, that's how things change. When we speak. Paul tried to visit every other weekend. He was quieter now. He still didn't understand everything, but he was more patient. He read books about parenting. He sent me a message one night saying, "I never learned how to be soft. I'm trying." I didn't answer right away. Later, I wrote back, "Learning is a good place to start." One Sunday evening, after Jamie had gone to sleep, I sat alone again in the kitchen, just like I had that night so many months ago. The same lamp glowed above the sink, but I was no longer afraid. I was no longer small. I looked around our little home and thought about how far we had come. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the moment I stood up, I saved more than just myself. I saved my son's future. I saved our hope.